Hey, welcome back, folks. You're on The Reckoning, and we are scooting along into one of my favorite kind of segments. I love having someone else to talk to, so you don't just have to hear from me. We get to hear from folks a lot smarter, wiser, and more prolific than I am.
You got me to talk to.
Oh, Fish. Now you come in. Sometimes I try to get you engaged, and you want to talk, and here we are when I wasn't expecting. Like, my goodness, the voice is deep. No, we have Mr. Don Brown on the line with us, author, former Navy JAG officer, and someone I'm very interested to talk to and get into it with. This popped across my feed here. I knew that this was something we needed to dive into. A lot of articles and a lot of different directions to go. Mr. Brown, how are you doing? Thank you for being with me today.
Ryan, good to be with you. I'm just Don. My daddy was Mr. Brown, but thanks for having me on board, and looking forward to chatting a bit.
Absolutely. I can do that. I can do it, and I understand it. But we've got a new book out, less than a month old. It is still hot off the presses. Kangaroo Court, How Dirty Prosecutors and Sleazy Lawyers Destroy Political Opponents, Attack Free Speech, and Subvert the Constitution. I'm not sure how many more buzzwords for 2024 you could have fit into that. We're on a lot of timely topics. What brought this book on, and what's the main gist that you're hoping to accomplish by putting this out now at this time?
Well, we have to, we've had a great victory here, but we got to understand that the Democrats and the left have been using this lawfare as a weapon, really not just during the Trump prosecutions, which the book features in the last third of it, but for more than 30 years, they've gone after one opponent after another. And so these political prosecutions, and we've seen, the last couple of years, President Trump facing criminal charges in 4 jurisdictions, Florida, D.C., New York, Georgia. These are all frivolous, and it's caused a lot of attention to these prosecutions. They've been going on for years. So the book looks at, in the first 2/3, thumbnail examinations of prominent cases Democrats have used. For example, the governor of Texas, Rick Perry, prosecuted simply for vetoing a bill, allowed to do that in the Texas Constitution. We look at former Senator Ted Stevens. The Democrats into that seat, so they concoct charges against him, get him beat, get him convicted. That case is thrown out for prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutor commits suicide. Right there in St. Louis, you know about Kimberly Gardner and what she's been up to with the McCloskeys going after average Americans for trying to defend their home, or going after the Missouri governor, all that thrown out. So we look at one case after the other of how the Democrats have used these prosecutions, and these prosecutions are actually an attack. They're a direct assault against the United States Constitution. So the book lays these out, and includes the Trump prosecutions as well, to show the pattern. These cases make the news and they disappear, but I wanted to write a book to show the pattern over the years, and then I make the argument these prosecutors should be brought to bear. We need rogue prosecutor laws. Congress should pass rogue prosecutor laws so that any prosecutor who brings a political case, primarily for political purposes, ought to be subject to prosecution themselves. And so the subject of the book is that it's time to prosecute the prosecutors. I hope that it does some good, and I hope that people will read it and pass it out. We've got to understand what they've done. We've got to stop it.
Absolutely. Again, folks, we're on with Don Brown, author of Kangaroo Court, former Naval JAG officer, Judge Advocate General, by the way. I remember the old TV show. That's where I first learned that. But in case you didn't know, we're dealing with some top-quality folks here. But Don, let me ask you this then, but putting aside for a second at least the potential of who would be leading the Department of Justice, in your experience, which is pretty involved in this area, you just really raised an interesting point that we really need something through Congress too. How much do you see, or what maybe are the specific priorities or the balance between cleanup in the Department of Justice, cleaning up the place where the corrupt prosecutors have been, and what Congress, what our legislative body is going to have to tackle here? Because I know that a lot of us see so much executive room. We really just need an executive to clean house in the executive branch, cut it down to size. But there's still a role here for Congress. What part specifically on that legislative side do you see the priorities needing to be to help very specifically with this, the power of dirty prosecutors and how far we've come?
Well, in terms of the prosecutors, I mean, first of all, Matt Gaetz, whoever the Attorney General is, has got to just come in and just do a total house cleaning, because the Department of Justice has been totally infected, and it has become a cancer which is driving a leftist agenda. Congress certainly has got a lot on their hands, and you have a window of opportunity of at least 2 years where the president is going to have a Republican Congress. We've got to attack the national debt. We've got to put teeth into border enforcement. There's a lot of things to me on Congress's plate. But the problem with political prosecutions, this is an attack on the Constitution. And if we don't protect our Constitution and protect our cherished justice system, we've lost everything. And the book actually looks at political prosecutions going back for 2,000 years, coming right up from the Roman Republic, the Weimar Republic, Nazi Germany, Cambodia, Communist China, the Soviet Union, and what Jack Smith and Fannie Willis and Kim Gardner and company are doing, and relates it together. So we've got to really get tough about this. If we don't defend the Constitution, then we've lost it all. And that's really what this is about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, again, Don Brown, author of Kangaroo Court, you just mentioned, you know, obviously we've got Matt Gaetz here. I have a few pieces in front of me. But just from about 10 days ago, you were talking about Dan Bishop as a really interesting choice. A superstar, quite possibly, from North Carolina for Attorney General. I mean, I know, you know, at this point, Trump has announced Matt Gaetz as his nominee for Attorney General. That is not the only. That's one role. There are many deputies. There are many roles for that. Dan Bishop, since we've, you know, it seems to be a very interesting time of, you know, hashtags and tweet storms, lots of internet posts getting attention and maybe even driving some of the process as Trump and his team are paying attention to what people are saying. Shocking enough that a politician would pay attention to the people who elected him. What about Dan Bishop? Do we, the people, need to know? What should be on our radar if there's a role for him somewhere moving forward? Because you had some really good things to say about him, and not a name I think many people have heard.
First of all, I've known Dan Bishop for nearly 30 years, and I ran for Congress to replace him and did fairly well. Didn't quite make it out of the Republican primary when Dan stepped down to run for Attorney General of North Carolina. But he's been on the Weaponization of Government Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. And if you go back and you just Google Dan Bishop's cross-examination of Mayorkas, you'll see that he is a powerhouse attorney. And, of course, I wrote that. I was invited to write that op-ed for The Blaze, Glenn Beck's publication, before President Trump nominated Dan Gaetz with Matt Gaetz. And I'm behind the president's nominations. But Dan Bishop would be a brilliant attorney general. He would be brilliant anywhere in the administration, and is committed, again, to cleaning out the cancer of the deep state. And every one of these, we have 3 million, federal employees. We have a national debt now of $35 trillion, and the cancer begets the cancer, and that's exactly what we have in the Justice Department. If Dan Bishop were to wind up as Attorney General of the United States, he would be the best Attorney General in the history of the United States, bar none.
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic for Matt, too. He's going to have a little bit of a push, but, we'll see how it goes there. But if Matt doesn't make it, I sure hope Dan is in the wings.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing right now. I feel like not only do we have good choices, but there's a bench behind them. We've got multiple people who are up for consideration, who are being looked at, that I'm excited about. And that's good, because it's not just, a small handful, one table full of a cabinet. There are thousands of positions that need to be chosen here in a total clean out of not just the Department of Justice, but every single branch of government. In our last 4 or 5 minutes here, before I run out of time with you, let me ask you one question, because I know that there's something kind of plaguing a few of us. We're seeing now, and I saw another op-ed you did here again in the last few days about Jack Smith. That one is the Department of Justice special counsel, illegitimate special counsel, I'll add that. Jack Smith winding down. I agree with you. I saw the headline. Not a concession. It is a cover-up. I think that's absolutely what's happening, turning tail and running. But let me ask you about the New York case, because I'm getting questions about this one with Judge Merchan. And if you have something on Jack Smith you'd like to interject too, please do. But on the New York defamation, or not the defamation, but the hush money case, this one is interesting to me because people can't quite tell. Are we going to finally just have them come to the conclusion, okay, we have to throw out this verdict, we're not going to have a sentencing? Or is this possibly something they might try to cling on to for 4 or 5 years, wait till he's out of his second term, and then come back around just because they hate him and they're vindictive? I'm kind of curious your take on that, what might be happening.
Well, yeah. Thank you. And I spent a couple of chapters on that in Kangaroo Court, and the book that was released just a week before the election, as a matter of fact. And so it's kind of fresh on my memory. First of all, understand that the previous district attorney, Cyrus Vance, passed on this. Biden's crooked Justice Department passed on this. Alvin Bragg is a radical. He ran against Trump. The statute of limitations for the misdemeanor crime of falsifying business records is 2 years in New York. They try to put a felony on it to stretch it to 5 years, and they still need this crooked judge, Merchan, to extend the statute of limitations by virtue of the Governor Cuomo's executive order. A governor can't, by executive order, extend its limitations. It's crooked from start to finish. But if you think about what happened in the Supreme Court last summer, there are two significant cases that kill it. One, of course, is U.S. v. Trump, because they use evidence from the president's time in office for that prosecution. But another one's called Erlinger. Erlinger is the case which isn't directly related to President Trump, not directly, but it came down and said you cannot have a criminal conviction if you instruct the jury that there can be anything less than unanimous verdict. And this clown Mershon, who should be thrown off the bench, actually instructed this jury 3 separate times. You do not have to have a unanimous verdict, which is a violation of the due process clause of the Constitution. The Erlinger case will kill eventually the Trump case. So will Trump v. U.S. So whether they stretch it out or not, the case is basically on less than life fumes because of these two SCOTUS decisions. Mm-hmm. So we are at a point right now that they're simply trying to save face. Mershon put the case off. Now you have Alvin Bragg trying to put the case off. I'm confident Trump's attorneys will probably try to get it to the Supreme Court, because it will be reversed eventually if the Supreme Court remains intellectually honest by the Erlinger case, because Mershon said, hey, you don't have to have a unanimous verdict to convict. So we don't know what the vote was. And so it is on life support by the skin of its teeth. I've heard the theory, maybe they're going to try to drag it out 5 years. It will, as long as there is a conservative Supreme Court, this case will wind up dead in its tracks at some point in the future. And I think, frankly, I did this op-ed the other day commenting on Michael Davis's comments about Letitia James, and he points out there is a crime for conspiracy to commit rights. It isn't as strong as I want it to be, but when you have 2 or more persons who come together to deprive a person of their constitutional rights, that's a crime. And I think that Mershon actually was conspiring with Alvin Bragg to deprive the president of his First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. And I think that the Justice Department ought to look at Judge Mershon, ought to look at Alvin Bragg, and ought to put the pressure on all these kangaroo court commie prosecutors that have brought these cases against the president.
All right, you're absolutely right. And again, just a final minute. Any thoughts on the Jack Smith wrap-up? Is it really just, are they actually running turn tail, run and retreat and cover their tracks, or is there something more we should watch for there?
Yeah, I had an article a week or so ago in the Federalist arguing that Jack Smith is turn tail run, because, see, what happened is Judge Cannon down in Florida, taking her cues from Justice Thomas, threw that case out in Florida because Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed. His appointment was in violation of the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. The Independent Counsel statute, it expired in 1989, hasn't been renewed. And so I don't think Jack Smith wants the 11th Circuit to rule on that. Right now, you just have a district court judge saying it's unconstitutional. If the 11th Circuit says his appointment is unconstitutional, then the fact of the matter is Mueller is also. Mueller was appointed without proper authorization, and every prosecution under Mueller, including General Flynn, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Papadopoulos, you get a list. All those prosecutions would be wiped out because Mueller was unconstitutionally appointed, as was Jack Smith. I think Jack Smith is running for cover. He doesn't want the United States Court of Appeals, the 11th Circuit, to validate his unconstitutional appointment.
Yeah, absolutely. Don Brown, former Special Assistant U.S. Attorney, JAG officer from the Navy, and author, Kangaroo Court. Remind folks where they can get your book and follow your work.
Go to Amazon, The Kangaroo Court by Don Brown. I'm on Twitter at Don Brown Book. But go to Amazon, Kangaroo Court by Don Brown, and buy multiple copies and check them out.
Perfect. Appreciate your time so much, sir. Thanks for talking today. All right, folks, we'll be right back. You're on The Reckoning. Don't tune away.